In 1788, the first fleet arrived at Botany Bay, marking the beginning of European settlement in Australia. This momentous event was the start of a new chapter in the continent's history, forever altering its landscape and its people. Governor Arthur Phillip, leading the fleet, established a settlement at Sydney Cove. This site would eventually grow into the bustling city of Sydney, a cornerstone of modern Australia. Life was harsh for the early colonists, who faced an unfamiliar and often unforgiving terrain. They also encountered resistance from the Aboriginal inhabitants, who had lived on the land for thousands of years. The British brought their own laws and customs, which often clashed with the complex social structures of the Aboriginal people. This cultural imposition created significant tension and misunderstanding. The British claimed ownership of the land, displacing the Aboriginal people from their ancestral territories. This displacement had devastating effects on the indigenous communities. This led to numerous conflicts and violent confrontations as the Aboriginal people fought to protect their land and way of life. The struggle for control and survival was intense and often brutal. The arrival of the First Fleet marked the birth of a nation and the beginning of a painful history for Australia's Indigenous people. This event set the stage for the complex and often troubled relationship between the settlers and the original inhabitants of the land. The early settlers of New South Wales faced numerous challenges. The land was unfamiliar, the climate harsh, and food scarce. The settlers had to adapt quickly to survive in this new environment, which was vastly different from what they had known in Britain. The colony was heavily reliant on supplies from Britain, and delays led to hardship and starvation. The long wait for supply ships often meant the difference between life and death for many. Despite the hardships, the colony slowly began to grow with the arrival of free settlers. These new arrivals brought with them hope and the promise of a better future. These settlers established farms, businesses, and communities, laying the foundations for a new society. Their efforts were crucial in transforming the fledgling colony into a thriving settlement. However, this expansion came at a cost to the Aboriginal people, who saw their way of life increasingly under threat. The arrival of settlers disrupted their traditional lands and practices. They resisted the encroachment of the settlers, launching raids on farms and settlements. These acts of resistance were a testament to their determination to protect their land and culture. The early years of British settlement were marked by resilience, adaptation, and conflict, with the indigenous population increasingly marginalized. The settlers' ability to adapt was key to their survival, but it came at a significant human cost. As the colony of New South Wales grew, the settlers' ambitions grew even larger. So did the desire for new land, driven by the promise of prosperity and opportunity. Explorers ventured inland, charting unknown territories and establishing new settlements, often encroaching on Aboriginal lands. The discovery of fertile land led to the establishment of new colonies, which rapidly expanded. The expansion of British settlement had a devastating impact on the Aboriginal population, leading to widespread displacement, starvation, and disease. The introduction of new diseases, such as smallpox and measles, decimated entire communities, leaving a trail of suffering. Despite their resistance, the Aboriginal people were outmatched by the colonists' superior firepower and military tactics. The British government often turned a blind eye to the plight of the indigenous population, prioritizing colonial interests. The expansion marked both progress and tragedy, transforming Australia into a new world, but at a high cost to the Aboriginal people, whose way of life was forever altered. The discovery of gold in the 1850s transformed Australia. The news brought a flood of immigrants from all over the world, eager to seek their fortune. Cities boomed as people flocked to the gold fields. The gold rush led to rapid population growth and a more egalitarian society. It boosted the economy, providing capital for infrastructure and industry. However, it also exacerbated tensions between colonists and Aboriginal people. Despite its challenges, the gold rush was a defining period in Australian history, marking the emergence of a modern, dynamic nation. The gold rush left an enduring legacy on the Australian character, fostering a spirit of independence and resilience. By the late 19th century, the 6 British colonies in Australia had developed distinct identities. A growing sense of nationalism led to calls for federation. On January 1, 1901, the 6 colonies united to form the Commonwealth of Australia. Federation transformed Australia into a unified, self-governing nation with a parliamentary democracy. British colonisation brought institutions, language and culture that shaped Australian society. However, it also had a devastating impact on the indigenous population, leading to dispossession and violence. The legacy of this injustice continues to be felt today. Australia grapples with the challenge of reconciliation and addressing ongoing inequalities faced by its indigenous people. Like and subscribe to Emgotvhistory Warfare for more stories.